And we are live. Today we're going to be talking about the anti-vaccine mandate protests that have been going on in Canada, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's crackdown on said protests, and the weaponization of freedom. We're going to be talking about all of that and much more on episode 333 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got VP and Chief Bottle Washer at the Heartland Institute, Jim Lakely. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing great. Welcome, everyone, to what the government and certainly social media tyrants believe is a wretched hive of scum and villainy. The In the Tank podcast. We are accused of spreading dis, and malinformation. The latter defined as saying things that are true, but troublesome to the ruling class. So I could not be more proud. Buckle up.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute, also joining us. How's it going, sir?
Doing good, Donnie. How are you?
Oh, fantastic, as always.
That was brief.
That's right. He's always very, concise with his words. You can tell that he's an editor.
An editor.
AnneMarie Schieber, she's second week in a row joining us, research fellow at the Heartland Institute and managing editor of Healthcare News. How you doing?
I think you guys are liking me.
That's right.
2 weeks in a row. I feel honored.
Yeah,
and you know what, Jim? I'm one step ahead of you. I'm already on the acronym for ML. What was it? MDL. MDM.
MDM.
Mal,
that's right.
dis.
Or
what is? I can't even remember.
Dis and malinformation. MDM.
Dis and mal.
Yeah, that's
nice. All right. Before we jump into our topics at hand, I just want to remind everyone that's watching this that we were punished a couple of weeks ago for talking about COVID by YouTube. So in an effort to protect our main Heartland channel from being nuked from space, yet being able to speak freely with no self-censorship, we moved the In the Tank podcast to Rumble and a standalone channel on YouTube that's just called In the Tank Podcast. So please make a point to subscribe to that channel if you want to support freedom of speech. It's the easiest thing that you can do and kind of show your support for the show. For the audio-only listeners, nothing for you is changing, so just continue doing what you're doing. All right, crew. In the last episode, we established that none of us were watching the ongoing Winter Olympics. I can't imagine that that's the same story for the Super Bowl. Did you guys tune into that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. AnneMarie, that's a no?
I didn't even know it was going on, to tell you the truth, honestly.
All right. Well, this will be a conversation for Jim and Chris because I didn't watch it either. But I understand that there was two kind of major takeaways from the Super Bowl from a cultural perspective. Number one was that millennials realized that they were old now after watching the halftime show. This was supposedly appealing to the young crowd instead of, having the Rolling Stones on or, something like that. And then everyone after the show realized that, no, we're millennials and we're old now too. It was Eminem is 49, Snoop Dogg 50, Mary J. Blige 51, Dr. Dre 56. Chris, you feel old?
Well, I grew up with these artists, so to me it was a like going back to my childhood. I loved it. I you know what? To me, the halftime show was very entertaining, and that's all I wanted. I wanted 15-20 minutes of just good old-fashioned entertainment. They delivered it. I got it. I'm happy.
Jim, were you disappointed that we didn't have some old 80s band up there again?
Well, it's not the millennials who should feel old. It's we Gen Xers who realize that when your generation is performing that halftime show at the Super Bowl, then you've passed over cultural relevance at that point. I mean, when we were in our 20s and 30s, Rolling Stones, Tom Petty, all of these guys that my older brother, generation before, revered as artists were doing the Super Bowl halftime show. Probably the hippest one, or more contemporary, was Prince, but even he was past his prime. And so it's my generation. I'm 51. Those guys are all my age. We're on stage. It was actually kind of fun to watch. And I grew up listening, in my 20s, I bought those records and listened to that music. Well, what I found kind of funny is, like, if especially with Dr. Dre, I mean, The Chronic is like this iconic gangster rap hip hop record. It really changed the game. There is not a single song in the in the regular version, in the vulgar version of that record, that could be remotely played anywhere near that Super Bowl venue. And to think that we had canceled, and our culture cancels people for using certain words and depicting women in certain ways. If anybody listens to The Chronic by Dr. Dre, with today's sensibilities, you might faint. I mean, you literally might faint. It's pretty radical, and it's not okay for people today, I gotta say.
Little known fact: Jim went to grade school with Snoop Dogg.
I did. Yep.
Yeah, you learned
Did you
something
really?
new every day.
No, I did
Wow.
not. Go to grade school with Snoop Dogg.
All right, so the second thing was that nearly every other commercial was an electric car commercial. So this was another thing that I had seen. I had watched a couple of these in the aftermath of the Super Bowl. One I saw featured the kids from The Sopranos, which, it was kind of interesting to see because I'm currently rewatching The Sopranos. But yeah, they're driving their electric car or something like that through, and basically recreating the opening scene of the Sopranos. And another one featured Arnold Schwarzenegger as Zeus driving around an electric vehicle, which was more cringy than most commercials that I ever see. But Jim, you were actually one of two people that pointed out to me via text that there were so many electric vehicle commercials during the Super Bowl. How many were there?
Oh, I didn't count them. I didn't count them up, but I swear, I mean, every car commercial. I mean, look, the Super Bowl is the, is a major cultural event, probably the last major national cultural event that we still participate in as a country. Even though AnneMarie didn't participate, she's a rebel in that way. But I think 113 million people watched the Super Bowl. Even 103 million watched the halftime show at the Super Bowl. So this is a major cultural event. But commercial after commercial would come on, and the Super Bowl is where you sell cars, you sell beer, you sell Doritos, snack foods. That's basically the big three for Super Bowl commercials. One car commercial after another. I'm like, is anyone going to sell a regular car? I mean, every single car commercial was EV. It's like, this is crazy. So every other commercial was either cryptocurrency, ways to buy it and trade it and all that stuff, or an electric vehicle commercial. I kept waiting. Doesn't Dodge Ram want to sell any pickup trucks anymore that actually fill the gasoline?
I mean, think about it. Millennials, who are now the key consumers, they're in that age group, and many of them don't own cars. They think they're anachronistic. They use Ubers. They live in cities. They lease cars because they don't think they're going to be around the next day. So I thought that was real interesting, and maybe that's why they are pushing electric cars, because that might just get them on board to buy one.
Well, it's more than that. It's virtue signaling. I mean, these are cars that are not in wide production. You can hardly get them. They're super expensive. They're not very practical. The technology isn't there. I mean, they show commercials of people you pull alongside in a city street, and there's the plug. You plug it in, then you go get your latte, and you come back, and you can just zoom off and do whatever you want. That infrastructure doesn't exist.
Well, that's why
at all.
Well, that's why I thought the Arnold Schwarzenegger commercial was so authentic, because you have to be a god of lightning to be able to charge your car on a consistent basis.
Yeah, but the point of a actually, I thought that was kind of funny. But the point of a commercial is to sell products people could go out and buy right then. And you can't.
See, I think
these are not ready. This is not. We do not have the infrastructure for which these little fantasies that they were laying out there with these EVs exist.
No, I think.
Well,
right, Jen.
we don't even have Doritos in the store, so I mean,
Good point. No, I think you were closer to it just being like virtue signaling. This, to me, I think this is just showcasing your brand more than trying to sell products. This is just kind of PR. They just want, this typical family that's watching this be like, oh, look, Howard, Ford's making an electric vehicle now. How cool! They're saving the planet. That's what they're going for with this. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I also think they're just trying to make EVs cool, but they're not cool. And they're even not cooler when you use Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's like 30 years past his prime, to try to sell one of them. I'm sorry, but they're just not cool. No matter how cool they try to make them.
Well, do you remember I think it was last year. It could have been multiple years ago. Maybe they do it every year. I don't know. But there was a Google commercial that was like a tear-jerking Google commercial that was showing off, like, I think it was like an old like widower that was remembering his like past spouse by using Google services or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a very well-crafted ad, like, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't crafted to sell Google products. It was crafted to be a PR move to paint the picture of a caring Google as opposed to the tech giant that squashes conservative voices, censors content for China, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what all of this is. You don't put it out there. You don't put this $1 million ad because you think you're going to make up for it by selling electric cars. No, you're putting that out there just to show that you are caring about the planet. I think that's all it was.
And the Super Bowl ads get so much attention that they're worth every cent they pay for them, because everybody feels compelled to watch them because you just don't know what you're going to get. They get so much attention. So it's probably a great opportunity to push your image.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy the commercials in the Super Bowl. I don't leave. I got up to get another beer during the game. I wouldn't miss the commercials. But yeah, it is about virtue signaling, and they are usually interesting. But it's like one after another. I just couldn't believe there wasn't a single regular car being sold, and I think it is all about virtue signaling. But because this stuff isn't ready for prime time,
right,
at the least, and they are super, super expensive, and you probably have to wait in line to get one. And as AnneMarie said, millennials don't really care about cars anyway. So
Yep. Any other takeaways? Anything that I'm glossing over? You mentioned the crypto thing. That was a big deal. We don't have to get into that. Anything else Super Bowl related?
I thought the Salesforce ad with Matthew McConaughey was virtue signaling at its worst.
Oh gosh, fill me in. I don't even know what happened.
It was, just a attempt by Salesforce to portray themselves as, the guardians of the environment, the guardians of social justice.
Ooh.
And last time I checked, that's just not really the case. So I don't really understand how, AnneMarie was saying earlier about the, some of the ads. They're not actually selling the product. Salesforce was not selling its product. Salesforce was selling a social justice, utopia.
Right.
Yeah,
that seems like a pretty heavy lift for a database company.
Yeah.
The other thing they're doing is they're selling jobs to people because they're having probably a hard time finding enough people to work, and they want to appear woke and hip, and they're reaching out to millennials, and that image selling probably really counts a lot for them. I kind of like when McConaughey was selling Lincolns. I guess that commercial wasn't on anymore.
No, it has to be an electric Lincoln. I'm pretty sure Salesforce, and I don't want to get sued if I'm wrong here, so check my check my research here. But I'm pretty sure Salesforce is one of the guys behind it is a big proponent of the Great Reset. So it doesn't surprise me. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they had that message in there.
One other thing, this was not commercial related, but I did notice in the intro that they had Billie Jean King, and she was pushing a lot of equality and a lot of equity and a lot of diversity and a lot of the inclusion narrative. So even for the opening of the Super Bowl, NBC still could not help themselves. They had to push the social justice. Just can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
And then Eminem tried to stir the pot by kneeling, and no one cared.
Yeah,
it's like,
I know. Eminem kneeled. I was like, I totally forgot that was a thing. And he kneeled. I just thought he was just kneeling. That was just what he was doing on stage. I didn't know he was trying to send a message about Kaepernick or anything like that.
On Twitter, there was a bunch of people like, "Oh, if conservatives are mad about Eminem kneeling," it's just like I haven't seen one conservative that has voiced any amount of outrage about that.
It literally never crossed my mind.
Me too.
And Jim is upset about everything. So.
I know. I get triggered by a lot of stuff. I just thought it was part of his act. I don't know.
Well, in an effort to trigger Jim into doing his typical Jim rants, let's talk about the trucker protests going on in Canada. So this Freedom Convoy, as it's being labeled, is been going on for a little bit now, and we haven't really talked about it on the podcast, at least not in a substantive way. But considering the authoritarian response from Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, we figured that it would be time to kind of shine a spotlight on what's going on in America's hat. So you can correct me if I'm wrong here. This is just kind of a basic outline of kind of how we got to the point we're at today, but my details could be a little bit off. So with the vaccine mandate stuff kind of going around the last several months, the truckers that had traverse Canada into the United States, they were temporarily exempt from any of these mandates. And this was in part to help alleviate some of the supply chain issues that have been going on. These exemptions ended in the middle of January, I think like January 15th, something like that. So to protest these vaccine mandates, truckers and supporters decided that they were going to orchestrate a freedom convoy and head up to Ottawa, the capital of Canada, to protest basically what's going on with all of that stuff. And the protests really got cooking in late January, early February. Thousands of semi-trucks, tens of thousands of supporters have since descended on Ottawa to protest the vaccine mandates and some of the other COVID restrictions. So far, so good.
Yep.
My description, that is.
Yeah, I love the truckers. The truckers are our modern day freedom fighters. They are our Paul Reveres. They're not backing down. They're not afraid of Trudeau. And you can see there were a couple of opportunities there where they tried to bait them and get them into violence, and that didn't happen. You know, no one really talks about this. 14 governors sent a letter to Trudeau and 2 premiers in Canada telling Trudeau, knock it off, get the exemptions back. And he's not. And what's going to happen is these truckers, many of them are small business owners, they're going to leave. They're going to find something else to do with their time. We already have a shortage of truckers. We have empty shelves in our stores. I thought it was interesting because I'm based in Michigan, and the governor's been complaining, who's running for governor again, complaining about the supply chain issue and the truck industry, the car industry, which is right over the Windsor Bridge. Trucks travel through Michigan night and day. Okay, they supply the car industry 24/7, and she didn't sign that. She didn't sign that letter. So it just kind of tells you where these governors stand. They're not too worried about the supply chain issues. Also, healthcare workers are also mandated to have all their vaccines by this month, by March. And so we've got a shortage of truckers. We've got a shortage of nurses and healthcare workers.
Yeah, well, Jim, you were telling me that there's kind of 2 separate things going on. There's like the kind of bigger protest that's going on in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. But then there's also like I think this was over the weekend. I think this was a much shorter term protest that was like a blockade of the bridge. Right. One of the bridges, the Ambassador Bridge or something like that, that goes from Canada into Michigan. Right. That, to me, after kind of looking at that, a little bit harder to defend that one. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I mean, that's been cleared off. I think they did that to make a point. I don't think they intended to permanently block off all commerce between Canada and the United States in the most busy, import port between the 2 countries that we have. But they made their point, and that was cleared. And the trucks are moving again. What I find really it's almost comical. When real workers unite, that makes the left really nervous. Yeah. Workers of the world unite, except for you filthy, disgusting truckers who actually work for a living.
Workers of the world unite, unless you disagree with us.
Right? No. By workers, we meant leftist professors and teachers unions. We didn't mean truckers who actually do the work in this country. Yeah. So I found that was funny. But look, this has gone on too long. I think it is absolutely. Actually, I'm jealous as a country. I'm jealous. This could have and should have happened in the United States. It actually hasn't happened in the United States because so many governors are being a little bit more reasonable. Like Florida, we keep forgetting that people are friends in Florida. There's a Tim Benson who works for the Heartland Institute, lives in Florida. He's like, what are you guys talking about, man? I've been living a normal life for 2 years, for most of the last 2 years. And so, a lot of places in this country, it is a normal life. But in Canada, they just keep locking it down and locking it down. I'm actually getting in favor. I'm almost in favor of just a general strike of all truckers in all of North America, in the United States and Canada, to make the point that this stuff has to end now. It has to end now. And so look, Justin Trudeau is holding the line. He is continuing to have vaccine passports and mandates. I think the deal was you have to show proof of vaccination going from province to province across the country, and then of course to come in and out and cross the border between the United States. And most Canadian truckers are in the United States all the time. That's part of their job. But these provinces, under the pressure, this great pressure that these, in a very peaceful and inspiring protest that these truckers are doing in Ottawa, other provinces in Canada have relaxed their restrictions. The premier of, I think they call them premiers of Ontario, the largest and most populous province in Canada, announced just the other day, yep, we're no more vax mandates, no more masks. The off ramp is like next week. Thank you all for doing your part to keep us safe, but we're relenting. Justin Trudeau is not relenting when everybody around him is, and that is so strange because he is not viewed as some kind of strong leader. I mean, he's Prime Minister Zoolander. He's the pajama boy Prime Minister.
Right.
This is a guy who is so he's standing strong, and you have to wonder why. I'm starting to think that he's not actually looking out for the interests of Canada. Well, when all these other premiers are doing that, but he's not. I think there's he's not influence here.
Yeah, well, let's hold off on that because I want to get to like some of the crazier things that he is doing in response to all of this. But before we get into that, as these protests were starting, once they were really getting going, and it was clear that this was going to be more than just a very short-lived protest going on in Ottawa, you had Justin Trudeau referring to these protesters as a fringe group with unacceptable views, which we could have a whole conversation on that. But this idea that it was just like a handful of troublemakers type of a thing. I don't know if those comments were made before some of these images that you see where these crowds just stretch on for as far as the eye can see. And it seemed like there was an entire PR campaign waged to demonize these protesters, equating the protesters to terrorists and Nazis and bigots and racists and transphobes and basically any other name that you could think of. Prime Minister Zoolander called these people. GoFundMe, there was a GoFundMe campaign to support the truckers' protests that raised like $10 million or something like that. And GoFundMe shut it down. They probably gave a reason, but I'm sure it's not a good reason. So an alternative Give Send Go was created, and then this was hacked, and the donor list was leaked, and these hacked donor lists were shared on Twitter. Twitter didn't do anything about it, even though they supposedly have terms and service stuff talking about how you can't share stolen whatever, the justification that they use to not run the story about Hunter Biden's laptop or anything like that. But no, these hacked doxed donors for this Give Send Go, that was allowed to be sent around.
It's still out there right now.
There was gasoline bans. They weren't allowed to sell gasoline to these truckers. And there's been a whole number of things that the governments have tried to do to basically break up these protests. But they have stood strong, and they continue on. Chris, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I've been watching this, pretty closely with the past couple of weeks, and they've done a lot of interviews with truckers from their cabs. So we know why the truckers are doing this, and they're not doing this just because of the vaccine mandates. 90% of truckers in Canada have taken the vaccine. I think they said like 85% of Canadians have taken the vaccine. Donnie, they're doing this for the simple reason that 2.5 years into this pandemic, it's still restrictions. It's still that's what they're fighting against. They're fighting for their freedom, and they've made it very clear. And you know what? Most Canadians support them. Canadians are in solidarity with the truckers because the truckers are just saying, hey, you know what? We are going to finally stand up for the people. And the draconian measures that Justin Trudeau is taking, where he is, taking away their licenses, and he is debanking them, and he is just really making, life very difficult for them. I really hope that backfires on Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is not the dictator of Canada. He's a wannabe despot, and he needs to be put in his place.
Yeah, so let's get up to the current stuff that's going on. So instead of taking all of these protests that have been going on for like weeks as like a reality check that these restrictions and mandates were going too far for the general public's liking, and revoking some of these things, or at least pushing them back. No, Trudeau has doubled down. They invoked the Emergencies Act to declare a national emergency in Canada The definition under the Emergencies Act is an urgent and critical situation that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians, and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capability or authority of the province to deal with it. So remember, these protesters aren't looting and burning down buildings. They're honking their horns. I don't think that this goes beyond the capacity of the authorities to be able to deal with this at this current time. This one article that I'm reading off of, this is a Federalist article. It says the Canadian Civil Liberties Association has said that the federal government has not met the threshold necessary to invoke the Emergencies Act. So if this is the Canadians' equivalent of like the ACLU, and they're defending the truckers in this case, you know that the Canadian Prime Minister has kind of lost the narrative here. It says under the Emergencies Act, protesters can have their bank accounts frozen, and so can people who simply donate to protesters. Crowdfunding platforms and payment service providers must cease all services to anyone they suspect might be participating in illegal blockades and report it to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Truckers can have their commercial and private driver's license revoked and can lose their insurance on their vehicles. Even more ominously, Canadian government officials are now warning parents who bring their children to, quote, illegal assemblies or even provide food or fuel to protesters that they can not only face jail time and steep fines, they could also lose custody of their children. This is the situation that we're in now.
It is. It's like Canada's Tiananmen Square. And, he's desperate. I heard recently a poll came out and only 18% of Canadians would elect him again. I'm wondering who these 18% are. But, in any case, I've been reading and following a lot of the op-eds, especially the media from Canada. And there was an opinion in the Globe and Mail, which was just stunning to me. They were talking about one of the premiers or one of the candidates, conservative candidates, who's been talking about freedom a lot. And I'm going to read this line to you. Freedom is a word that gets bandied about a lot these days, but has been mostly co-opted by the alt-right, both here and in the US during the last federal election. Who would have ever thought that freedom would have been a controversial word? Now it's considered an incitement to whatever, to disruption. It's just stunning to me.
Yeah, well, I want to get to all the freedom stuff. I think that's going to be a larger conversation for us. But let's go back to the other thing that I punted on, which is why do this? Why double down so hard on this? Pretty much every other country, like Jim said, is starting to either signal or, start to roll back the restrictions, ending mandates. We're seeing this stuff even in Illinois. In Illinois, they're talking about getting rid of some of these mandates and the vaccine passport type stuff at the state level. So it's like, why not in Canada?
But that's because the politicians don't want to give up control. Whether it's Justin Trudeau or Governor Pritzker here in Illinois, he's fighting tooth and nail to get that mask mandate reinstated. It just makes no sense. But I think when you just think about it from that perspective, these people crave power. They were given unlimited, unfettered power, and they want to keep it as long as possible.
I guess, but Jim, does that jive with you? That why are all these other countries doing it? Why we talked last week about how maybe it's just for political posturing. They want to be able to declare victory on COVID when the midterms come around. I know Canada, they've already passed their election, so is this all just political? What do you think?
Well, I think Chris has put his finger on it. It's about people who have gotten a taste of tyranny and absolute power and really like the taste of it and don't want to stop. We've said on this podcast many times, you cannot comply yourself to freedom. You can't comply yourself back to the way things were. You're only going to continue. This only goes in one direction when you keep complying and doing whatever your without the real proper authority, whatever your authorities and your ruling class tells you to do. Look, I think that Justin Trudeau could end all of this tomorrow, right now, at this very moment. He could end all of this. He could just say, I'm going to follow the advice. We're going to do now here in Canada what Sweden has done, what the state of Florida has done, what even the province of Ontario has done. And that is to end the mask mandates and end the vaccine mandates as well. We could just move forward. That's all he has to do. If he did that, those trucks would be out of there in 10 minutes. but he's not going to do that. And you have to wonder why. Why is Justin Trudeau not doing this, doing things that other leaders around the world have done and have no problem with it? And I think, when the truckers were approaching Ottawa a couple of weeks ago, Justin Trudeau left. He went to an undisclosed location and did not pop his head out of his out of his hole for a couple of days. And I have a feeling, and that this isn't exactly an original thought. I mean, Jesse Kelly, if anybody listening to this podcast is familiar with him, his radio show, he had mentioned this the other day, and I think it's spot on. I think, and it ties into the Great Reset stuff that we talk about on this podcast a lot. I think when he was down in his undisclosed location in his bunker, he got a phone call from his fellow global leaders and globalists that go to things like the World Economic Forum, and they said, "Look, Pajama Boy, if you break, it's done for all of us. You cannot let a group of deplorables, these dirty, filthy, ignorant truckers who don't know their place, you can't let those people push us around. You can't let them have their will be done. No. Our will be done. And if you go down, we all go down." So this is why, that's the only explanation that makes sense to me as to why, when everybody around him is being reasonable and finally giving up these emergency powers, he still refuses. I think that is the only explanation that makes sense to me.
They've tried that probably with other leaders, and they've said, no, I've got to listen to the voice of our people. He would be a hero tomorrow if he did that. If he turned around and said, we were wrong, I want to listen to the people, and we're done with this. But I guess they figured he was a pawn and he could be manipulated easily and he cowered to them. And that's why he's at where he's at.
Yeah, the world is watching this one. They're not watching every other leader around the world. They're watching him. Everybody's eyes are on this right now. And if he goes, they all go. And I think that's exactly what happened.
I just feel like the easiest thing that he could do, like just from like a political point, political posturing thing, is just to kind of echo those stories that we talked about last week, where it was just like, oh, the science has changed. I'm not relenting because of the pressure of these protesters, but we're just getting to the point in our caseloads where we don't need these restrictions anymore. It's just coincidental that it's happening alongside these protests going on. Like, wouldn't that be the path of least resistance for them? That's why I'm so confounded, and that's actually why I am sympathetic to your theory there, Jim, that it's actually like him being his feet being held to the fire, not by his constituents or anything in his government or anything like that, but by, I don't know, World Economic Forum type people, which isn't just, talking out of my backside. Like, there are clips of Klaus Schwab, the head of the WEF, the biggest proponent of the Great Reset, basically gloating about how they have penetrated different government administrations around the world, and he specifically mentions Justin Trudeau's cabinet. So it's not that crazy that he's on the phone with them when he was quarantining himself away from freedom.
Well, and Jen Psaki a couple days ago admitted that the Biden administration is working with Trudeau's government, and they pushed the federal response with the Emergencies Act. So just to back up everything Jim said, yes, this is a global conspiracy to just keep the pandemic going forever and ever.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's another thing that Jim said that I want to kind of piggyback off of is the idea that he's proud of this movement in Canada, and it's something that should be emulated. And a lot of people around the world believe that as well, because we're seeing similar type of, not to the same scale, freedom convoys happening in different countries, a number of European countries, France
Israel
specifically, Israel. I don't know how many semi-trucks they got up there, but sure. And, a whole host of places. So it's a movement that's resonating. And that's the most dangerous thing for the ruling class, is when you have something like this that is truly organic, that is resonating with people and spreading organically.
Well, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think you really have to look at this, the bigger picture. What's really disheartening is how our the ruling class and our media are together on this, and they are joining, and the social media giants and all this stuff are joining forces to oppose, again, workers and regular people uniting and standing up for their rights. The digital revolution and the aims of the corrupt ruling class, they've now come together for really totalitarian ends. I mean, you say the wrong thing on YouTube or Twitter, and boom, you're gone. if Justin Trudeau is one of the most controversial things, again, we just kind of passed over it, is that the country of Canada, under the Emergency Act, has decided that they can just seize all of your funds. They could just seize your bank account. If you supported these truckers, they're going to take all of your money. They've actually threatened, I saw this just today, that if you brought your pet with you, and a lot of them did, to this protest, because they're going to be there for several weeks, if you are arrested and you don't come to claim your pet within 8 days, and maybe we don't let you out for 8 days, they will kill your pet. They will take your children away from you if you're arrested and there's nobody there to take care of them. I mean, they are pulling out every totalitarian stop, and they don't seem to have any hesitation to do it.
You know, when we did that
this is crazy. And then the media helps them by characterizing these peaceful protesters as being violent and being racist. They assist the ruling class, this corrupt ruling class, by doxing people, by getting the people who donated as little as $25 or $40 to help a trucker feed his family for a day. They get their name, they go and contact them, and they expose them. What is the public purpose of exposing somebody who donated $40 to these
to
truckers?
help other people? Right.
The Washington Post actually published a story criticizing a woman for giving $40 from here in the United States to this effort. This is where this all comes together. This is where this corruption is so deep, and our ruling class, they need to be rejected with this stuff. That's why, it's just sick. It's really, really sick. And it should disturb everybody. And even though this is all happening in Canada, this is all of the part, because we're victims of this in certain ways here in the United States as well.
Well, the taking the kids away thing, when I read that, I thought of the poll that we recently did, where we had all of the different like draconian measures and seeing what people would be in favor of. And my most extreme one that I could think of was, would you endorse a plan to take kids away from people that weren't vaccinated? And like, that was just to see the extremes that people would go. It's not a roadmap for Justin Trudeau in response to all of these protests. So I am sorry for any confusion. Yeah. And then real quick, to back up my claim of that Klaus Schwab thing, I do have this video prepared here. So hopefully the sound works. Let's see.
And I have to say,
can you hear that?
Yes.
When I mention our names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So
his word, not mine.
I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more, half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Yeah. So there you go. They penetrated Justin Trudeau's cabinet, and more than half come from World Economic Forum's Young Leader Program or whatever. So
odd use of word choice there, but yeah.
Again, his word, not mine.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, but Donnie, I think that Jim was talking about how this is like the difference between the elites and the working peoples. The truckers, for me, represent common sense. They represent what the ordinary Canadians and ordinary just people understand, and that is that the pandemic has been over for a very long time, and we need to get back to normal. And the people in Justin Trudeau's circle, they are on Zoom, they can get away with life in this perpetual pandemic. But the truckers are saying enough is enough. Right. We represent here the people of Canada, and it also goes to show like how fragile like the elites' like hold on society is, because all it takes is one cohort, one group of people to say enough is enough. We're just not going to drive our trucks anymore, and society will fall apart in a matter of weeks, if not months. Right. How are they going to feed people? How are they going to do anything? Justin Trudeau and these these eggheads and pinheads, they can't do anything. All they can do is, sit there and theorize and, try to, tell people what to do. But they don't actually do anything. The truckers do something.
Right. And they only threaten and coerce.
And they're using that leverage. And I'm glad that they're using that leverage. I wish they would have done it 2 years ago.
Right.
And again, Trudeau says that he needs to continue to have this vax mandate and this and the mask mandates to stop the spread of COVID-19. Can we just say right now that this has nothing to do with stopping the spread of COVID-19? People who have been jabbed 4 times get and spread Omicron. Every time I get every podcast of ours banned just because I try to tell the truth, because I keep mentioning this fact, but it's the fact that people who have been jabbed 4 times are still getting and spreading Omicron. This has nothing to do with stopping the spread of COVID-19. It has everything to do with putting, us in our place, and the ruling class making sure that we know it. And I think the thing that really angers me and those truckers and a lot of other people is that in good faith, we did things like, okay, 2 weeks to stop the spread. Okay, I'll do that. Oh, you want me to wear a mask? Okay, well, I really do think it's important that we do this together. And so, but they took advantage of our goodwill and our good faith, and they are refusing to even acknowledge that they have taken advantage of that.
Well,
And so that's what I think. It's that kind of burning. It's that kind of slow burn, I think, that leads to something like a trucker protest that that just seems to come out of nowhere, while all of the deaths and all of this stuff actually is in decline.
Look at the map that I have up here. This is the daily new cases in Canada. You could see that it drops off pretty steeply. It's been dropping off pretty steeply for the last month or so. So yeah, the idea that we have to do all of this because we're all going to die from COVID seems like a outdated. I don't know.
And notice the peak.
Where are we? 2020?
The peak is 2 years out after all these measures have been in place, and we're still seeing surges.
Sure.
But people are going on about their normal lives. I mean, everybody knows. They know this stuff no longer works. That we did what we had to do in the beginning when we had very little information, but now the information is out. You can't suppress that.
And at this point in the pandemic, and especially with Omicron, case counts are meaningless, because we all know that the vast majority of people that get Omicron are going to be fine. They're going to have a common cold. So why are we even, hyperventilating about case counts still? I mean, come on.
Well, and we have to add to all of this the fact that we were lied to about, people dying of COVID, because, it took 2 years. But no less an authority than St. Anthony Fauci even said, we got to be careful about, listing people's dying with COVID instead of COVID. It's like, you know what? People that had common sense were saying that very thing 2 years ago, and were banned from social media for saying it. And so we can't even trust. They have done this to themselves. The reason we don't trust the elites is because they are not trustworthy. They have purposely lied and manipulated data. They have. Let's just say it on this podcast, which will now be banned again. They have purposely lied, manipulated data, and lied
to the public.
Yes, they have purposely lied and manipulated data to control us, and they took advantage of our good faith. And now that we see them for the liars and manipulators and tyrants that they are, hopefully this is the end game and they back down. But I have a feeling that Justin Trudeau is actually wanting a violent reaction. They've been trying to goad these truckers who are, again, dirty, filthy, ignorant people. They figured it'd be easy to get these people to just start, picking up, crowbars and banging heads.
Yeah, occupiers and insurrectionists.
No, they're not taking the bait, and more power to them. They're not taking the bait. And I keep thinking of that scene at Tiananmen Square where they were just out there protesting, and before you knew it, you saw military vehicles gunning them down. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I mean, I think we just can't forget that. We have authoritarian power spreading throughout the world, and in Canada could be the next showdown. I don't know.
Yeah, and for the young people that are watching, they get all their news from Reddit. Tiananmen Square is probably something you haven't heard of because the Chinese-owned Reddit doesn't allow that type of stuff on there. So look it up. You got to Google it.
Yeah.
DuckDuckGo it. So I want to go back to that conversation that you started bringing up, AnneMarie, which was about the weaponization of the word freedom. So I've got a couple of articles kind of outlining some of this stuff. One is from the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, CBC, right? Why the word freedom is such a useful rallying cry for protesters. So this might be the worst article I've ever read, and I'm sharing it with you guys. So the article tries to argue that freedom is a malleable term that can mean all sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, sure, why not? I don't know. But doesn't that apply to everything? Like, how about protests about justice, Can't justice mean a whole bunch of things? Or the slogan, all cops are bastards. Doesn't that mean, well, no, that one's pretty clear. But the article goes on to say that freedom is a slippery concept, says Anchor, an associate professor of political science at George Washington University and author of Ugly Freedoms, which examines the history of how freedom as a concept has been used in American society. Quote, on the far right, individual freedom is often translated into somebody who refuses to be bound by norms of equality, treating all people equally, or norms of remedy to remedy inequality, whether that's trying to remedy racial discrimination or gender discrimination, which I just think is like a ridiculous thing. Norms, like if you want to put in like force from the government or laws or dictates or something like that, then sure, I would agree with your statement. But like the idea that it's like rejecting norms, no, those things aren't related. In a section of the article subtitled "Pushing Individual Freedom Over Social Good," again, just highlighting how terrible of an article this is that they would have a sentence like that. It continues. Anchor says the concept of freedom is displayed in the anti-mandate protests is something more often attributed to the United States. Quote, freedom is often used almost as a national entitlement, as a claim of what people have, she said. Damn right, it's a national entitlement. That's what America's all about.
Right.
I mean,
it's a God-given right.
Yeah, and the article is just filled with junk like this. It's preposterous, referring to it as the idea of freedom being used to justify like selfishness. I think they talk about in this article, and a whole host of different. It's all of this is being used by the alt-right. Like I've never seen a hit piece on freedom before. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Donnie, I'm reminded of the Billy Madison quote. Thank you. Now we all dumber after having heard that, whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, that just immediately comes to my mind. But I mean, come on, like freedom is not a dirty word. Freedom is the bedrock of America, and it should be celebrated. This is just preposterous.
Well, this is actually not a this is kind of like, we always say this, like they said the quiet part out loud. This is not a very radical concept on most academic, on most campuses these days. And I got news for these academics and for everybody.
Yeah.
Because they said here abusing free, so I guess people on the alt and the far right, everybody who doesn't agree with the leftist is categorized that way. But apparently they were abusing freedom to push back on remedies for inequality. I think something like that was said in there.
Yeah.
Hey, here's the thing. Freedom and equality are two very different things, and they are often in conflict with each other. That if you can either have your freedom to live your life as you wish and be unequal, and not have equal outcomes with everybody else, or you can take away freedom to make sure everybody is equal. Right. It's really hard to do both. And so the left does not value obviously, reading a piece like this, they don't value freedom at all. In fact, freedom is the biggest impediment proven by what's written in this article to their attempts to impose equality. So that's why you see things like that. This is not a radical concept to most leftists. No. This comes off the tongue as easy as breathing.
Sure. Yeah, they don't want sheep.
Okay.
Just real quick, Donnie. They want sheep. They do not want free-thinking individuals because sheep are easier to control. They want to control them. To me, it's just as simple as that.
I'm reminded of a really famous line that Larry Reed said years ago. Not all equal people are free, and not all free people are equal. That's just the way it goes. And I would tell you, I wouldn't say, to me, the opposing value of freedom is conformity. That's what they're pushing. They're pushing conformity, and they're using fear and division to do it. And they created an enormous amount of fear over the last couple of years. Everybody was a walking petri dish of poisonous germs. And I think people started to see that was not true. And they complied in the beginning. But what a huge price we have paid. These things are not going away. Even Scott Atlas, early on, I remember hearing a speech from him about right after he left the White House on COVID. And they asked him, do you think that masks will ever go away? And he said, I don't think so. Not from the people I'm talking to. They're here to stay. Think about it. The flu vaccine, we've had that for a long, long time. 50% of the people get it. They get it because they find it valuable to them. But half the people don't get it because they don't want it or need it. And people never question that. And now all of a sudden we hear that possibly COVID vaccines could be pushed on us every single year. So the vaccine is just another avenue of conformity and control.
Yeah, the concepts of what freedom means to some of these like academic types, or that professor that I was quoted in that article, it gets so like perverted in their heads, where they're talking about like, well, what is freedom? Is freedom the ability to like murder your neighbor or something like that? It's like, no one has ever suggested that that's the case. Like, it's, I don't know. If we're getting to a world where we're trying to defend freedom, have we gone too far as a society?
Well,
this is ridiculous.
You know, Donnie, this goes back to FDR and what he called the 4 freedoms. One of them being the freedom from want.
Right.
What does that mean, the freedom from want? No, I just have such a different outlook on life. I feel that it is your individual responsibility to, to make it, in this world. And that is just, antithetical to the modern left, who want everyone to be sheep and everyone to just do as they say. However, of course, as we've seen throughout this pandemic, they don't follow their own rules.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah, exactly. And that's what, that's what enrages people and gets them to take to the streets, is that they watch the Super Bowl, 75,000 people in the stadium, nobody wearing masks, especially if you're famous, you're not wearing a mask, and it's like, this can't continue. I mean, they're just flaunting it. They're just wagging it in our face and saying, no, but you must still comply. It's like, no, we're not doing this anymore. Give us our freedom. The fact that this sentence has to be said, give us our freedom back.
Right.
In either the United States or Canada is so frightening, because again, we did this, you told us that this was a pandemic that could kill grandma. We're going to help out here. I think we should do the right thing. And for that favor of suspending our freedom and restricting the way we live, we have been punished nonstop for 2 years with no end in sight. And so this can't continue. There's going to be protests like this in the United States if this continues much longer. I think Joe Biden is probably going to announce that we all get our life back, kind of a redo of his Declaration of Independence or Independence Day from COVID, like last year, the first year of his presidency. He's going to do that. His State of the Union address is on March 1st. So I would expect actually an announcement shortly before that.
Oh, speaking of that,
to prevent Jim, any protests here.
I should have promoted this earlier in the podcast, but you just reminded me. March 1st, State of the Union, Joe Biden. We are planning on doing a live stream of that, basically a live reaction stream. Jim and I were just kicking this idea around yesterday, so it's not like, it's definitely, we're going to do it. We just haven't figured out who's all going to be joining us and how we're going to, fill up all of that time. But if you are a frequent listener of our podcast and all that, and you like our stupid banter, make sure to join in March 1st. It's a Tuesday in the, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night or something like that. We're going to be doing a live stream for that. So mark your calendars.
Right.
More entertaining than watching Joe Biden.
Something happened like that in the city of Boston. The mayor said she still was going to clamp down on vaccines and masks. And she had an open town hall where people were just tweeting her out of oblivion. I mean, they were just so outraged about what she was saying.
Right.
Yeah, well, I want everyone that's listening to this to put in your comments. What do you think about the trucker protests going on? Do you think it's going to keep going or do you think it's going to be broken up by the authoritarian actions of Justin Trudeau and the government, or do you think that it's going to break the authoritarian back of that administration and they're going to have to relent? I want your predictions. Put them in the comments. I will read them. But what do you think, Jim?
I think it's going to end. I think ultimately Prime Minister Pajama Boy is going to back down. I think he's going to come to his senses, because there's only one place this goes from here, and that's violence, and that's something really, really dangerous. I think they have to pull back from the brink here, because if it starts getting violent up there, you're going to see some violence in this country in reaction to it. It would set off literally, not literally, but it would set off a powder keg of some real dangerous stuff happening in most of the free world.
Right. How about you, Chris? What do you think? Who's going to come out the victor in this standoff?
Okay, so in Canada specifically, I do not think that Justin Trudeau is going to back down. I think he's really going to, try to, do everything he can to make the truckers, life's a living hell. But Donnie, in your amazing book, The Great Reset and the Rise of 21st Century
Hey,
Fascism,
whoa,
Joe
whoa!
Biden.
I'm just a
Hey,
contributor.
hey,
It's not my
hey,
book.
hey,
Hey.
great book. I highly recommend everyone, read it. One of the things that you guys really talked about was that the COVID pandemic was really just, like the dress rehearsal for the climate change, phase 2. I have noticed, because I've been paying pretty close attention to this, Joe Biden and the White House have been pushing climate change big time the past couple of weeks. And he is also pushing his Build Back Better agenda again today in Ohio. So my prediction is that Biden is going to say, okay, fine, I'll kind of pivot away from all the COVID stuff, but now we're just going to go full bore into climate change.
Yeah, I've been waiting on that for a while. The whole CNN Project Veritas thing, where the guy said, "Yeah, once we stop getting ratings for COVID, we're gonna pivot to climate change." So
CNN yesterday held a climate special,
oh
and
god,
they did a prediction of what sea level rise would do to cities on the east and west coast. I kid you not, they showed this this like animation where the Washington monuments, like half of it's like underwater, and they are literally telling people, unless we act on this immediately, this is the future. So
did they have to
once again,
dust off that footage from
Well-
like Inconvenient Truth from like 20 years ago?
well, that I strongly believe that is the like long-term path
Oh, I
that
agree.
they are going down.
100%.
I
Yeah, no
really
doubt.
think that.
How dare you?
Yeah, Greta will be there along for the ride. All right. Well, fantastic. Anyone got any last word? Oh, wait, no. AnneMarie, I didn't ask you. Who wins in the standoff?
I think it's a test of wills. I think eventually Trudeau will buck, but I think it's going to be long and protracted. It's going to go on for months and months and months.
I would have said that I think that he will relent eventually, because if they do the crackdown stuff and they do start arresting people en masse and towing away thousands of trucks and taking kids away, it's not going to look good in the media, but the media's got their backs, generally speaking. So, of course, you wouldn't see any of that. And if you did, it would be blamed on these terrible freedom mongers or something like that. But so I don't know. I want to everyone that's listening to this, put in your predictions in the comments. I'm very curious if you think that Trudeau will win or the Freedom Convoy will win.
Donnie, one last thing. So in Parliament yesterday, Justin Trudeau called any of the conservative parliamentarians who are, in support of the truckers. He called them racist. He called them neo-Nazis. He said that you're, supporting swastikas. One of the Canadian parliamentarians, who is a Jewish woman, she came back and was, up in arms, saying that, come on, this just shows how desperate they are. They're trying to tar and feather this movement because they know that they do not have the public support.
See, there's a reason why I think the freedom fighters here the peaceful protesters for freedom will win. And AnneMarie is old enough to remember the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the collapse of a lot of the other satellite states of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Our CIA never saw any of that coming. They had no idea that these regimes were going to fall, and they fell because the people demanded that they fall. Now, I'm not saying that Canada is going to fall as a country, but I just have this
we'll
feeling.
Adopt you, Canada.
Yeah, that's right.
You could be part of America.
You could be America's hat, as they say. But I really do think that Justin Trudeau may seem strong. He is certainly threatening these truckers, and he keeps increasing the threats against them. All right, well, I'll arrest the people trying to deliver gasoline to you. Oh, well, that's not stopping anything. Well, I'll just freeze your bank accounts. Well, they're still there. Hey, I'll take your kids away. I'll kill your dog.
Right.
They've tried and they continue to escalate. And I think, he's running out of things to escalate other than actually having violence. And if he gets violent, if this gets violent because of the government cracking heads instead of just cracking down on these truckers, that is a real tipping point that you don't get back from. And so I think, after watching what happened at the end of the Cold War and these people who stood up bravely with threats of violence against them, and then all these regimes finally backed down. They ended up being paper tigers in the end. The only regime that wasn't like that, of course, was China. And again, you can't find that information on Reddit, but it's out there. It's history. And that's why I'm confident that, in the end, Trudeau backs down, freedom wins, and then, we'll let the liberals even take credit for it. I don't care. Just give us our damn freedom back.
Right. All right. Well, we are out of time here for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. I want to thank you all for joining us on this Thursday. If you're listening to us only, you're probably listening on a Friday. If you want to join the conversation live, put a face to the voices, you can by checking out our Facebook page or our Twitter page where we stream this, or you can go to YouTube and look up In the Tank podcast, find our new channel, subscribe to it. It's only got a handful of subscribers because, we're basically doing everything that we can to not self-censor and be able to tell you people the truth. So support us by making sure to subscribe to that specific channel. You could also follow us at In the Tank Podcast on Twitter if you want. Don't do it. Twitter's lame. But if you want to send us your comments, suggestions, or questions to the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me at J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. And AnneMarie, where can the fine people find your work?
We'll try to keep you informed. We will on healthcare news, the Heartland Daily News, heartlanddailynews.com.
Fantastic. And Chris, you are a ghost on social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Well, I do want to tell them to go to stoppingsocialism.com.
Oh, perfect. I'll set you up for that in future episodes. stoppingsocialism.com. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.